Bonnie Simon, and this is Dr. Stephen Simon. So if you've been following any of my channels, you know that I've been talking about the book and trying to help people find more satisfying work. And today, my father happens to be visiting, and so I thought instead of listening to me talk about the book, we would listen to him talk about the book. So I'm going to ask some questions, and we will see what we learn. So yes.
Well, you may be wondering why I'm sitting here wearing a coat for this interview. Uh, I'm a Floridian, and we're doing this interview in Colorado Springs, and I'm cold.
I can't understand it, but there are things you can't change. Anyway, what we're going to be talking about is what to do if you have gaps in your employment history. Sometimes when you go to do your resume, you find that you had a job from, I'll pull years out of the air. You had a job from 2000 to 2005, but then maybe you didn't have a job from 2005 to 2006. And if you have a lot of these gaps in your resume, then that can be something of concern to employers. So we're going to talk about that, how to handle that in your resume and in the interview today. Dr. Simon, what do we mean? What do we mean when we talk about employment gaps? Did I get it right?
Yeah, when we talk about gaps, we're talking about periods of time that you may have missed in your employment history. For example, a person may, over a 10-year period of time, have a 6-month gap, then have a 12-month gap, and typical gaps like 2 or 3 months when you're looking for employment, that's usually considered normal. But if you have a longer gap, uh, the type of gap that an employer is going to say, well, what was going on during this period of time? Why did this person not work for so long a period of time? Those are the kinds of gaps we're talking about.
And it's helpful to remember who your audience is when you're talking about these kinds of gaps, that your potential employer has gotten this resume out of nowhere. They've probably never met you, and they're just looking at this piece of paper. So we're not saying that there's anything wrong with you or that this is anything to panic over. We're just saying that when a potential employer looks at this piece of paper that represents you, this is what they're thinking. So why is this of concern to an employer? Why would they be concerned about these gaps?
Well, employers usually want people who are going to be able to consistently perform at their jobs for longer periods of time. So if somebody is showing that they worked for a while and then they didn't work for a long period of time, the employer is thinking, well, is this person going to be able to consistently perform for me?
So it said that some people have gaps, like the gaps that just happen in life, that maybe you weren't working because you were raising your children or you were trying to start a business or something like that. But then there's other kinds of gaps where people find themselves with health problems or with drug and alcohol problems, and it's a little bit harder to explain in an interview.
Yeah, and employers are particularly concerned about the latter type of gap. Um, when an employer looks at a resume, they can often tell whether it's likely to be a situation where you had children and you were raising your children, and so for 8 years you didn't work. That's something that is likely to be uh, assumed, although it's something that you would want to clarify in an interview and the employer would want you to do that. But the types of gaps that the employer is most concerned with are gaps where you had some sort of personal difficulty, where you had to leave work for a long period of time, or maybe you were fired and you couldn't get another job, or that type of thing has been happening repeatedly, and repeatedly having gaps is something that is going to be a particular concern because the employer may be thinking this individual can't hold a job, and that's a very serious concern because when somebody hires you, again, they want to make sure you're going to be able to perform consistently, do what they need to have done, and help them make money or whatever else their business is about. So if you're missing, if you're not able to do that over long periods of time, or you're going to have interruptions in your employment because you haven't been able to adjust or you had problems, that's going to be serious.
Okay. Okay. So if that's the case, how would a person handle it in a resume and a cover letter?
Well, if it's that type of situation, that is a difficult thing to deal with. Uh, you can sometimes explain gaps. You can show them in a resume, and you can explain them in a resume. The best ones to do that with are the ones where you did miss a long period of time because you were raising a child or because you had a single 6 month or 1 year period where you had a relative, a spouse or a child or a parent who was sick and you had to take care of them. That's pretty easily explained in a resume.
In the resume or in the cover
I'm
letter?
sorry, in a cover letter.
Okay.
That's pretty easily explained in a cover letter. But the other type where you've had short periods of employment and or several long periods between jobs, that's more difficult to explain, and I wouldn't necessarily deal with that in the resume, in the cover letter. But what I do tend to recommend in those situations is to try to use a functional resume where instead of chronologically showing your employment and emphasizing that, or let's say just emphasizing that, what you're emphasizing is the kinds of functions that you've performed, like administrative functions, information technology functions, engineering functions, if you happen to be an engineer, those types of things. And for each of those categories, you talk about the kinds of things that you've done and the kinds of skills that you have. And then you have a smaller section in your resume which may touch on the employers that you work for and dates of employment. But the thing that you're focusing on is what you've done in the past and the skills that you've developed. Then, if that piques the employer's interest, which you want to do at the very beginning of a resume, you want the employer to look and say, wow, these are the kinds of skills that I need. And then when the employer gets down to the actual dates, they're going to have some concerns, but they may be more focused on your skills and be inclined to call you in for an interview. And that's really what you want, so that you can then try to explain in the interview when the employer asks you about the gaps, you can explain that at that time.
And this, in a way, is how I've always looked at looking for a job. And I think I've mentioned in other videos that because I'm the child of the career expert, I've never had trouble finding a job. When I do a resume, the resume's goal is just to get an interview. That's it. I don't need it to explain everything that's ever happened in my life. I need it to be easy to read and make the employer want to talk to me. It's the interview where I really go into how marvelous I am and why they should hire me. Yeah, suppose you do get an interview. What do you say then? Like when the employer asks you, are they going to ask you about the gap?
If the gap looks significant to them, yes, they're going to ask you about it. They're going to be concerned about it, and they're not going to let it go by.
All right. So assuming it's one of these more troublesome kinds of gaps, how do you approach that? How should you think about the employer and what you're going to say, and what's the best thing to do?
Well, the first thing that's really important is that you've got to prepare in advance for this type of thing. Don't think that it's not going to come up, because it is going to come up. So you have to prepare in advance, and really what you're trying to do when explaining gaps is you're trying to present it in a positive light, and that's a difficult thing to do if you have lots and lots of gaps. So you're going to have to do the best you can with that,
Okay.
and show how you learn from some things that may have happened to you in the past, how you've learned and how your behavior has changed. If we're talking about if you're talking about a behavioral issue in the workplace where you didn't get along with people and you got fired, or you couldn't learn the job quickly enough and you got fired because of that. If those kinds of things have happened, then you're going to need to explain how you learned from those experiences and how things have changed. So it takes a considerable amount of preparation to do that type of thing.
Okay, I actually encountered somebody who had a situation like this when I was hiring. It's a long time ago now, but I interviewed a young man who had been fired from a job, and he did pretty much exactly what you said. That he had clearly thought about what to say, and when I asked him about the gap, what he told me was that he had I think it had been an issue of being late. He had been late too many times, and he had gotten fired. And he said that he had learned a lesson about how people work, and that if he was going to hold down a job, he was responsible for himself and making sure that he got to work on time. And in that particular case, he wasn't the best candidate for the job, so I didn't hire him. But had he been the right candidate, that explanation would have been good enough for me.
The other thing that I want to mention is in situations like that, if you have references, good references who will vouch for you and vouch for the fact that you've made changes or that you've worked very well with them, that's an important point to bring up, because you can, as part of presenting this in a positive manner, you can tell the employer, I have some people who can speak to the issues that I've talked about and the fact that I've made changes, and they'll tell you about those, and I can give you their names, and they really would be happy to talk with you, or even write a letter supporting me for this job. So,
Great. Okay, that's right. Because a lot of people do have good relationships, and everybody has things that went well and things that didn't go so well. So you want to incorporate those things that did go well into your case for being the not only being the best candidate for the job, but in this case for these issues of what we call hygienic issues, where you would get hired if it wasn't for these kinds of problems. We also talked.
Let me just add one thing.
Okay.
And as a part of this whole thing, your skills are very important. So you want to try to weave in the fact that you have these really, really good skills. You made these improvements in your behavior or whatever it was, but you also have these really, really good skills, because that's really, really what the employer wants. They want somebody who has good skills and who can effectively use them on the job.
Right.
So you don't want to forget about that while you get tied up in discussions about the past and what hasn't worked out or whatever. You still want to be emphasizing how you can help that employer. That's the main thing.
So in this role play, I am the potential job. What do you call that? The applicant. I'm being interviewed for the job, and my dad is pretending to be the person who is interviewing me.
Well, tell me more about what your skills are. I want to know about your skills.
I thought we were talking about the gap in employment. I didn't make up any skills yet.
Okay. All right. Well, I wouldn't start with it as an employer. I wouldn't start with the gaps in employment. But let's say we have already discussed your skills, and you have a pretty good skill set, and I want to know more. I'm not saying, okay, we'll consider you and let you go at this point. But you really do have some good skills. I've looked over your resume. We've talked a little bit about this, but I am concerned about the fact that you have several gaps in your employment. You'd have a job, and then you wouldn't have a job for 6 months, and then you'd have another job for 3 or 4 months, and then you wouldn't be working again for a year. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm really actually glad you asked that question because I feel like that's an important part of what I bring to the job. I had, to be honest, struggled with problems with depression, and that's the fictitious part. I had struggled with problems with depression, and sometimes I would work, and then I would find that I couldn't work for a while, and I would get better, and I would work some more. And finally, this last gap that you see here, I realized I had to do something about it, that I couldn't live my life that way. And so I checked myself into a program to help me with my depression. And, and really, what I want to tell you is how it has made me a better worker. When you check yourself into a program like that, they help you, they teach you how to deal with other people, how to how to manage your own emotions and how to manage anger and what to do when you start to feel depressed so that you can continue to function. And as a result, I'm completely different. I am able to manage my depression so that it does not interfere with my work. And I am able to use those skills that I learned to help other people on teams work together and feel that their work is valued and feel that everyone is working together as a team so that the work is the focus and that it gets done.
I really appreciate you being honest about that with me. Um, but what can you tell me about how you demonstrated that? Because that's really important to know if you're going to be working for us.
Well, in my last job, I worked with a team, and we had a. I'm trying to make up an example here on the fly because this is all fictitious. In my last job, we had a team, and we had one person that was really bitter, that they were angry, and the bitterness sort of and the discontent started to move from one person to another. But this is something that I had learned to deal with in my program. So I asked everyone to come together and have a meeting about it, and we looked at it head on. Like, what were we really unhappy about? Were we unhappy with the job? Was there a problem in the work environment that we couldn't manage? And what I found was that they talked about it, and what we discovered was that the one person who had been so bitter to start with had felt like they wanted to be doing a certain part of the work, and we were able to work that out because we all came together and discussed it rather than just pretending it wasn't happening. And the result was that the project got done on time.
Okay, and now I'm going to make it really difficult.
I don't know if I can manage this because I haven't practiced that.
But this is what I'm thinking. Why did you leave that job?
Because I wanted to. Why did I leave that job? Why are the reasons one ever leaves a job? I left that job not because of the group, but because I wanted to build up my skills in this other area that that is part of your job. So I want to bring the skills that I developed at that job to you, which I think I can really contribute to what you're doing. But I'm also very interested in learning this other element of it and getting some experience with it.
So you didn't get fired from that job?
Oh no, I didn't get fired. In fact, they offered me more money to stay, but I really want some different experiences.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for sharing all that with me. It's very helpful information. Do you have some references from that job?
I do. I have some, not my direct manager because, well, I guess I've already said that I've quit, so I could say that. So you could talk to my direct manager from that job, or there are people on my team as well that can speak to my ability to enhance the work of teams.
Okay, very good. Yes, I'd like to do that.
All right. All right. That is our role play. Hopefully you would be better prepared than I was, but that's because I was making it up. So what can you do?
Did very well.
Thank you. All right. Is there anything else that you can tell us about what, particularly like right now, we're filming this in 2018, and the job market is really good. But there are times, of course, when it's harder to find a job. There aren't as many jobs available. Is there anything else that you can tell us that might help people with employment gaps find ways to get hired during those difficult times?
Well, the difficulty in getting hired can be not only in difficult employment times, but it can be in full employment times,
well,
like we're experiencing now. But I go back to prepare, and that's really what you need to do. You need to look at it from the perspective of an employer and do your preparations so that you can present things in a positive manner, that you can emphasize your skills and what you can do for that employer. And even if it gets to the point where it looks like the employer might be willing to hire you, but it isn't sure, you can talk in terms of doing an internship, or you could talk about doing a volunteer assignment for a short period of time. Some employers can do that, some can't. There may be legal issues, but it's a possibility. The other possibility is just to do some shadowing of another employee for several days, and that way the employer and the person that you're shadowing gets a chance to observe your behavior, gets to see how you interact, and you also get a chance to see a little bit more about the organization that you would potentially be working for.
All right. Thank you very much. And the name of the book is Relaunch, Stagnation, Change, and Renewal in Mid-Career and Beyond. All right.
And you can get it at Amazon.com.
All right. And if you know anybody who is dissatisfied with their career or is having trouble finding a job, please forward this video to them and let's see if we can help them. All right. Thanks for your time.